Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So I had an interesting time coming up with the title for this video, and a little bit later on you might understand, but I entitled it My UDM Pro and More. So I upgraded my network gateway from a UniFi Security Gateway, or USG, to a UDM Pro around June of 2020, 5 years ago. And so UniFi OS presently in June of 2025 is at version 4.2. And from UniFi OS version 1.x to 2.x, Podman containers were used to manage applications like the network controller, protect, talk, and access, although I wonder at the time if all of those applications existed, and I know they didn't. So from UniFi OS version 3.x and onward, Ubiquiti uses systemd services to run the network controller, protect, talk, access, and other applications, and that seems to be an ever-expanding suite. So on the UniFi host, which would be something like a UniFi UDM Pro, a UDM Pro Max, a UDM Pro SE, or really any of the cloud gateways, including a Cloud Key Gen 2, you're running UniFi OS, and each of the applications on those devices is managed by a systemd service unit file. So the first thing you want to do here to take a look at all of this is to log into the CLI of the UniFi OS. And by default, you have to go out and set that up because SSH is not enabled. Go down to Settings on your device and go over to Control Plane. From there, go to Console and down to SSH. If there's not a check mark in the SSH box, and there is not by default, go ahead and click the check for SSH. And then click Change Password and put in a password. Once you do all of that, you'll be given an option to go ahead and save those settings. Then you can SSH into your device. In my case, I have a DNS name of UDM for my UDM Pro, and you're always going to be logging into the root account. So we're going to do SSH root at UDM. And then it goes ahead and logs in. It will tell you what the firmware version is. The translation of that is the firmware version is the version of UniFi OS that you're running. So what are the UniFi OS services? Well, right after logging in, one of the interesting things to do is to do an LSB release-A, and you'll see here that UniFi OS is really Debian 11 Bullseye. And then you can do a systemctl. You don't need sudo since we're in root. Systemctl list-units type equals service, and then pipe that to grep and look for the word UniFi. There's a bunch of services out here, but the notable ones really are the credential and directory services, which handle your logon and access to data. MongoDB, which has always been the database for the UniFi network controller. And then since I'm running Protect and Talk, you can see those two applications here. And the very last thing here is UniFi.service, which turns out to be the UniFi network controller. Originally, I thought the UniFi network controller was UniFi-core.service, and it is not. It is the UniFi.service. So the UniFi network controller service looks a little bit like this. And I apologize for the blurriness, but I kind of did a screenshot of a screenshot. The point here is that this is the systemd unit file for the UniFi network controller. If you want to take a look at yours, you can simply cat out /lib/system/system/UniFi.service, and so all their services are stored in the standard service directory for systemd. Now, the notable thing I noticed about this is that the exec start keyword is invoking a Java application, And that's because the Unified Network Controller is actually a Java application, and it's run as user UniFi, and it uses the Mongo database just like it used to back in the early days. The difference is that this Mongo database is being run as a separate systemd service. So one of the reasons I made this video is my network controller kept stopping. And it was stopping and restarting and stopping and restarting. And ultimately, it didn't restart. It just stayed stopped. So basically, I couldn't get into the network program to manage my network from the GUI. So I noticed that when I did a df-h, this thing called the overlay root, which is really the root mounted device, was at 100% use, which meant that all the space on it has been used. And I don't know about you, but if you're working on a Linux system and you find that your root device is completely full, that should probably throw up a red flag. So the next thing I did was I went ahead and did an lsblk-f because I wanted to see what all the storage looked like. And when I did that command, I could see here that there was another interesting device which turned out to be SDA5. And SDA5 was using a file system inside of it on MD3, and it created an AXT4 file system. That thing was 99% used, and it was called Volume 1. And that is actually the 10 gigabyte spinning drive that I have in the slot on the front of my UDM Pro, and it stores my camera recordings, and also it stores my voicemail for my UniFi talk. So Volume 1 really isn't the issue. The Volume 1 mount is on /dev/MDA3, and it's for that spinning drive that I mentioned in the RAID set. So at this point you'd be going, RAID set? What RAID set? So when I did a df-h on Volume 1, here we are. We've got 100% utilization on MD3. So that volume is full. And I'm thinking, wow, well, maybe these backups are stored to the volume where my UniFi Protect camera footage is going. And maybe this overlay file system is on it somehow. And I don't know what I'm dealing with. So anyway, this drive is used to store UniFi Protect camera recordings and UniFi Talk voice mail and recordings. And so we'll remember that. So what about this RAID set? Why do we have a RAID set on a UDM Pro? Well, MDAM, which is the multiple device admin in Linux, is basically the device that manages RAID arrays, and /dev/MD0 is defined as a RAID 1 device, which is mirrored. And so if I go ahead and do a sudo, I guess I didn't need sudo, mdadm, which basically means MD and then administrated, and then do a -- detail on /dev/MD0, it says, wow, this RAID set is a RAID 1, meaning mirrored, and it is currently clean, and it is degraded at the moment. And the reason it's degraded is because I don't have the second drive installed on my UDM Pro. I only have the first drive. The second drive slot's empty. You're going to go, wait a minute, a UDM Pro has only one drive slot. The only thing that has two drive slots is a UDM Pro Max. And absolutely correct. It's my theory that they decided to create this RAID set, and the reason they did that was they were trying to go for essentially one code base, and if you have a UDM Pro Max and you have both drives installed, then you have that mirror set going on. If you have a single drive installed, even on a UDM Pro Max, then you have a degraded RAID 1 device, just like we see here on the UDM Pro. Anyway, interesting trivia there. So the next thing I did, and I should have done this a day earlier because I fought this problem for probably a little bit over a day to figure out what was going on. But I went into my UniFi Site Manager And up at my UniFi Site Manager, I'm saying here that the black lines show that the controller was down, but at the time the controller was down, I still had internet access, which made me realize that it wasn't really a problem per se with the UDM Pro, and it wasn't a problem with my cable modem, and it also wasn't a problem with my ISP, because devices in the house were still able to access the internet. Had I looked at this about 12 hours earlier, and I did, I just didn't take a screenshot, there were all these black lines that were in this, and the black lines essentially mean, well, gee, we can see your WAN address and it's responding, but your UniFi controller is not responding, therefore UniFi Site Manager can't really talk to you. And the red line here was when I was dinking around with it, and so the system was actually down, and the red line essentially means, well, I can't even reach your WAN address. And that was me. So basically what had happened is that auto backups had filled the drive. So for the first time in 5 years of owning this UDM Pro, auto backups, which to my knowledge were a default, I believe they've been set up ever since I first purchased the UDM Pro, they'd filled the drive, although they were supposed to auto purge, and I couldn't really understand how that would have happened. So this is basically where you can gain access to setting up the auto backups. If you go into settings and you're on the network controller program and you go into backups, here there's a check mark for auto backup, and I think by default auto backups are set to go off weekly. And one would think that 5 years of weekly auto backups certainly would have filled the drive long before now. And that's what makes me think that I believe that they should have been auto purging all along. And they probably have been. So then, just to circle back for fun, because this I consider to be a bit of a distraction, I was looking in the settings control plane and then over in storage, and it says storage is fully operational, but it appears that my storage is full. Well, that storage has absolutely nothing to do with that root file storage where the auto backups are stored. This is that spinning drive in the drive slot in the front of the UDM Pro, and that's specifically right now for UniFi Protect and UniFi Talk storage. So why is it full? Well, the reason it's full is because basically what happens is that it automatically auto purges when it needs more space for a newer recording. So now this is after I fixed the problem, and I entitled this slide, "Where are the auto backups?" I wish I had this slide prior to the time that I fixed it, but like I said, I did not do that snapshot. So I do a df-h, and here you can see that I've used 58% of that root file system, and there's 5.1 gigs used out of 9.4 gigs, so this thing is totally happy. So where are the auto backups? Well, as it turns out, there is a mount point in a hidden mount point called .rwfs, and then inside of that there's a folder called data. Inside of that there's a folder called data. Inside that there's a folder called UniFi, and just because we like data, there's another folder inside that called data, and then there's a folder inside that called backup, and then a folder called auto backup. And this is really after I'd been running it for just a couple of days, and you can see here that we have our auto backups taking place, or regular backups taking place. I guess these are actually auto backups, but they seem to be taking place every day or even more often, even though auto backups are set to go off weekly. So I find that kind of interesting. And basically they are using the space. So right after I had purged this space, it's using around 51 or 52% of that root device. So the thing that ought to occur to you is, why in the world would you store these large backup files on the root device? I just don't know. So how did I fix this? Well, apparently the auto backups fill the overlay file space, which is also the root. Bad idea. And apparently they don't auto purge, and I don't know if that's new as of UniFi OS 4.2 or new as of UniFi Network version 9.x, or what exactly is happening. But I can tell you this is the first time that this has occurred for me in 5 years, as I mentioned multiple times. So I can do a sudo rm, I don't need sudo, rm-rf on that mount point and delete everything in the auto backup folder. And you're going to go, well, there's some JSON files in there and everything. Well, that's true, but they seem to auto-generate. And then when I did a df-h, as you can see here, it basically says that it still is using 100% of the drive space. And of course it is, because we deleted all those files. You wouldn't expect it to free up any space. So, and that's the point, that even after deleting the auto backups, the system was still completely full. However, I rebooted, and after a reboot, that deletion fixed the problem, and now it went back to becoming only about 51 or 52% full. So before you panic, yes, this option is actually in the GUI. You can actually go down to Settings, and then System, and then Backups, the same place where we set up auto backups to begin with, and then you can click on Download Backup. And when you click on Download Backup, it'll give you all of your available backups. You can put check marks in those backups, and then you can go ahead and click Remove to delete those particular backups. So in summary, I've always used auto backups for 5 years now, and they've never filled my disk. And it seems that the GUI command to delete UniFi network controller backups is buried too far down in the GUI. It's inside of Settings, Systems, Backups, Download, and I really don't consider that intuitive. It seems like a setting like that should be at a much higher level. And then I'm wondering if this might be a network version 9.2.87 issue, since that's the latest as of June 18th, 2025 that I'm doing this video. And so, has anyone else experienced this with UniFi Network Controller auto backups? And if you had, I'd sure like to hear from you. Go sign on to chat.scotti-BYTE.com and drop me a message, and let's discuss what you've been seeing on your UniFi Network Controller, and if you had any issues with that root device filling. And also, do you think that perhaps they should store the backups in a different place? Like perhaps if you have one of those optional add-in drives in a UDM Pro, a UDM Pro SE, a UDM Pro Max, or other devices that support a drive, should we not be able to repoint those auto backups to that storage? Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit your notification bell, and we'll see you next time.